what I am looking at here is the question about, are we actually serving the people we claim to serve? Now, there's three tiers of government, of course, federal, state and local. And I think there are issues with each level of government, and there are good things and there are less good things at each level indeed. But it is also fair to say that the local government is where the actual people can speak face to face with their representatives. Now, I do recall before I came into this august body, the thought of actually contacting an upper house member of parliament was something I found rather daunting. The same is true also from the members from the other place. How often do we get to see them, really? I mean, we all know from our offices how many people do call on us, so it's not that rare, but for the vast majority of us, the state level is a fairly exalted place to visit, is it not? How much more so the federal government. The local government, on the other hand, is a place where we can readily contact our members and we can readily express ourselves at a variety of opportunities. And we see them, they may even be living next to us, so we can speak. And so I think it's really very important to recognise that there is a fundamental part of democracy here, the voice of the people, and being listened to by the people who claim to represent us. And I think it's essential that we do everything we can to ensure that the people that we claim to represent are in fact able to have their needs and their feelings described and met. I say to the people in my particular party that when we do come to power, and it may happen, that I would demand that the member for Kununurra has different requirements than the member for Albany, because they're two very, very different areas. And if they said exactly the same thing, that people need exactly the same thing, I'd say, well, both of you are failing your jobs. We need to represent the people, not the party. And having a relatively apolitical local government is, I think, one step towards that. One thing which in the first tranche of local government I actually thought was a problem, because we have the possibility now of actually politicising our local members. And that, I think, is probably a danger, because then we're not actually serving the people anymore. We begin to start serving the party first and foremost. So I took a very close look at this second tranche and analysed as best I could, because I have no experience at local government level. Well, it's not true, actually. I do, because I was working very closely with the local government out in the wheat belt where I was, in the method of how do we present good healthcare, especially at the times of COVID, by the way. How do we make sure that people are kept safe under very difficult situations? The amount of work that was done by the local volunteers and the local members of local government was astounding, something that we do not actually see at state level or indeed federal. And the question has been put a number of times in a number of places that maybe we've got too many layers of government. Maybe one of the layers ought to vanish. And I would be strongly supporting the fact that federal government ought to vanish, really, but that's just my point of view. Others seem to suggest that local government may be less necessary. And it seems to me that the legislation that we are about to pass, because it will pass despite all the points that are being made, with this overwhelming majority that is so-called democratic, but currently does not actually meet that level. This legislation which will pass will reduce the extent of democracy available to our people. And I think this is something we need to highlight. But I've been through this with some degree of concern. And there's 13 points, so I probably won't get through them all this evening. The first one was actually about the election methods and integrity. This is section 31, the governor's power to decide election methods. Now, consider these words. The governor's power to decide election methods, not the people's power, not the local council's power. So they're empowered to direct councils to hold postal or in-person elections, or overriding, wherever necessary, local government preferences. Now, who gives someone the right to do that? Well, it's a bureaucratic thing, is it not? We're going to put someone in power. We're not going to elect them, we're going to appoint them, and they're going to have power over how a government actually holds its election. Now, some people, my friends may well know that I have a deep-seated aversion to bureaucracy, and I'll tell you for why. When I was 3 months old, I was born in Malaya, and it was discovered that I had congenital glaucoma. That's a problem where the eye isn't particularly well formed, and the fluid can't escape. Therefore, the pressure increases in the eye. It deforms the eyeball and results in blindness. And so I was flown a long way from Malaya by plane, prop plane, several days, to London. And that would have been in December sometime. I landed in London as a 3-month-old. And to Moorfields Hospital, one of the premier hospitals in the world, actually, for eye surgery, especially for children. We needed, of course, because we were colonials, we needed to get permission from the colonial authority for an operation on the NHS to be carried out. Now, that bureaucrat was away on annual leave. 1 month later, I got the signature to have my operation, resulting in the loss of one eye because it was a 1 month too late. A bureaucrat. Well, one-off, it might happen. 17 years later, when my father passed away, I applied for a grant to go to university for the next year to study medicine. Yes, they said, yes. Now give us the details of all the details you've got there and your father's last year salary. He's dead. No, we need his last year's salary. No, he's dead, I said. So I filled in the form and it was rejected because I needed my father's last year's salary, not my mother's last year's salary. It was a sexist time, was it not? So my entire time of medical studies was actually granted the income support of a dead father's future income. So you can appreciate that bureaucracy is not my friend, nor is it the friend of anyone that I know. There's box ticking, one size fits all, you don't quite fit the requirements, therefore you can't have it. Now we see this very well in Centrelink, do we not? And what we have in this bill here is another level of bureaucracy being inserted into local government. And I challenge anyone to tell me that's an advancement. I challenge anyone to show me where bureaucracy is actually of help. We're even thinking right now the red tape we have in our society is unacceptable. The planning permissions we need, bureaucratically being held up. The development of our state is being held in a state of limbo due to bureaucrats. And the amount of government interference in this, resulting in the process being undertaken which plods slowly through the bureaucratic chicanes until it comes to its ultimate conclusion some years down the track. And so we're having now another bureaucrat, actually a series of bureaucrats now being elected, or not elected, appointed by a government which doesn't actually benefit much itself from local government independence because it really wants to control the power, as we see when it comes to planning, for example. The point has been made, perhaps we ought to take the major planning out of the hands of local government. Maybe we ought to do that because then we can actually control what the local government is doing, $20 million or more, then we're going to take care of it. Fine. At the moment, what seems to happen is that we are demanding that we have control of the planning by the way they're setting up the organisation, but you, local government, have to fund it. And this seems to me fundamentally unfair. So, this change, it says, may affect election integrity due to known issues with postal voting. It's true. So clause 31 of the amendment bill allows the governor, on the recommendation of the minister, and after consulting the electoral commissioner, to direct the method of voting, postal or in person, for local government elections. Now, this removes the autonomy of local governments to choose their preferred election method. And that, I think, is a concern, because the local people know what's best suiting them, not someone who's appointed from maybe far afield. Or does anyone here think that if you wanted to come into Serpentine Jarrahdale, you would know the conditions of, I exclude the members of East Metropolitan, of course, that you understand the Serpentine Jarrahdale concerns with the local elections? I'm sure everyone here would jump up and say, yes, I know it very well, I can take charge. No, of course you cannot. But this is precisely what will happen when someone is appointed to do that. And I think we ought to be concerned by that, because if we're seeing a pattern here of government insertion into the affairs at a local level, we're going to increase problems, reduce the autonomy and independence of local government to the detriment of the people who live there locally. We ought to be concerned. And apparently, looking around this chamber, we are not. And that surely reflects a situation where we actually don't really care that the unintended consequences of this well-meaning bill might have effects which are not serving the people we claim to serve. That should give us cause for concern. Local government employees acting as electoral officers. The concern there is that local government employees act as paid electoral officers in local elections, creating potential conflicts of interest and may compromise election integrity. This is the analysis we've gone through. The Act doesn't prohibit local government employees from serving as electoral officers, and they may face conflicts of interest, and the potential bias or perceived bias could erode public confidence in the electoral process, especially if you find that the people you wanted to have elected haven't been elected. It may all be above board, but the perception is there. And of course, we understand perception is probably more powerful than the actual truth. Now, we come to section 72, the mandatory training and penalties for elected members. It's been mentioned by a number of our colleagues here. And elected members are required to repay training fees if they do not attend mandatory training, with penalties of up to $10,000. I wonder, this is just one example of how are potential councillors going to feel if they know that if they don't attend the training, they're going to have a $10,000 bill or something like that. Because Clause 72 amends Section 5.126, increasing financial penalties for non-compliance with mandatory training requirements. And this is disproportionate, is it not? I mean, supposing if I were, for example, to have mandatory training for, shall we say, how do you deal with difficult people? How do you de-escalate conflict? It's a very important thing to learn in communication. And I may have to attend the compulsory training on how to de-escalate conflict, ignoring the fact that I'm actually able to teach that as an NLP practitioner and very experienced user of psychology and similar methods. But I would be faced a fine for not attending training, which would be of a lower level of my existing skills. Has any provision been made for other councillors who might be asked to attend compulsory training for which they are more than adequately qualified and have better things to do with their time, like running their own businesses, and then face quite extortionate penalties? So this is here a one-size tick-box bureaucratic style, we'll do this because it's a good idea. And it is a good idea to ensure that everyone has got a certain level of training. But it is a one-size-fits-all and may not fit the needs of the local people. So this legislation should, therefore, if we want to mitigate this, include valid provisions for valid excuses for non-attendance and ensure the penalties are proportionate to the infraction. Now we can move on. The governance and the council oversight, the separation of CEO functions from council oversight. This is section 5. So it says the amendment here improperly separates the CEO functions from council oversight, limiting the council's ability to govern effectively and hold the CEO accountable. Now, let me give you an example. I've worked all over Western Australia, so I'm not going to tell you where, but there was a case where there was, in the town, there was a local mechanic who serviced all the farm equipment, all the local cars on the site, and did it very well, very effectively, very cost-effectively. The CEO had a friend in the town 160 kilometres away who found that there's a better deal for managing the council vehicles, and so all the council vehicles were diverted away from the facility right next door to the council, 160 kilometres, to another mechanic. And he was not held accountable, could not be held accountable, and quite happily did that for the entire term that he was there. I don't know what you think about that, but I think that is actually improper. So we need to find ways of ensuring that the excellent work of the CEOs, and the CEOs that I know from the East Metropolitan are fine, upstanding people indeed, and I have a lot of respect for them, a lot of confidence in their ability to really manage well. But without that ability to hold them to account, then we are going to have inbuilt problems. And we're going to disenfranchise the council members from actually holding the CEO to account. Because bear in mind, every employee of the council is employed through the CEO, not through the council members. So they have actually no influence at all on the activities of the council beyond actually having an opinion about the policies. And a CEO with a mind set to it can very easily override or run roughshod over the opinions of less experienced councillors, using the vast experience that many of them have to ensure that their point of view comes across. An unelected member of the council than forcing things through which the elected members may disagree with. But one then asks, what's the purpose of electing a council member if the CEO is going to do it anyhow? And that's a valid question, because it could then be the next stage of development is, let's do away with the elections because the CEO does a perfectly fine job. We've no need to have any elected members. That's the next logical step, is it not? And we ought to be very careful about beginning that movement right now. So we need a balance of separation with oversight to clarify the roles, ensuring the councils can provide strategic direction and oversight without engaging in day-to-day operations. Now, there's a council responsibility for organisational culture with that reduced oversight. So the councils, there's actually in every organisation, there's an organisational culture. And if the oversight of the CEO is reduced or difficult, then it's very, very hard to influence the organisational behaviour of that council. And if we're looking here at a CEO coming from outside, with a different approach to life and living, maybe someone who's actually usually an urbanite, is now the CEO of a rural and regional farming community. The values that they are going to have and the cultural values that they have is not going to match the population. And I think it's really important to know that we need to have councils which can then ensure that their cultural norms are not being abused by someone who comes in from outside. And so the legislation we have now is actually encouraging this level of disconnect between the people and the council, which can then only lead, I would put to you, can only lead to a reduction in the efficiency of the council. And then the question that councillors would then ask themselves, is it worth my while standing for election if I'm going to go into that situation where I actually don't matter, what I can do doesn't matter, and I've got no control over how it's going. I'm simply going to be exposing myself to the difficulties which this legislation has very beautifully created. And I think it's going to have the opposite effect to the very high intent, the noble intent of the ministry here. And I would counsel that we ought to be careful in how we actually review this law such that we are able to make the amendments. And I would be actually suggesting, I'm not going to put the motion because I know it's going to be reduced, but I would here be suggesting we refer this to the Legislation Committee. I know it's a late stage in the Parliament, and I know it's going to be ignored, so I'm not going to put it forward, but should this not be something that we do refer to a committee which would then examine this closely and look at the issues that have been raised by myself and other colleagues with some degree of impartiality, because what we are doing now is going to influence how our councils function for some considerable time. We have to get it right. We have to get it right now. Section 7. Part of Section 7 suggests we expand the duties to include non-residents. We must now consider the interests of people who work in or visit the district, potentially diluting the focus on residents and ratepayers and overextending resources. So Clause 7 replaces Section 2.10, expanding councillors' roles to represent not just residents and ratepayers, but also workers and visitors. OK, I see the point, but there is an issue which could be raised with that. It's inclusive, but the broader scope may strain resources and complicate decision-making. So we're making it that the councillors now have less in the way of influence, but now they've got more responsibility. And this is not a good mix. So it's struggling to meet the expanded expectations while we're actually oppressing the councillors with the legislation we're creating is not going to encourage the councillors to stand for what is actually a very responsible duty in society. It's an essential duty. And I think we should actually make it something that people want to do with pride, but also to feel the ability to function freely without being hobbled and shackled by legislation which may be well-meaning, but actually has the opposite effect. Now, we've only got a short while left yet, but another one here is the transparency and access to information. Now, I was struck repeatedly by the concerns raised by councillors who then said that they'd asked for information, but the CEO said, no, you can't have it. I'm reminded of the time when in this very chamber, I asked the Chief Health Officer about what he had been saying about COVID to the Cabinet. Oh, I can't tell you, he says. It's Cabinet in confidence. So the information was actually denied. the lack of transparency. The same thing is happening here as well. The information that the councillor would need to actually understand what's going on, the deeper depths, is being withheld because it's not your, no, this is here, I'm looking after this, you don't need to do this at all. So clause 43 amends section 5.22, making the CEO responsible for keeping minutes. Okay, and having the CEO or the delegate present during confidential discussions about the CEO's performance presents a conflict of interest and, surprisingly, might inhibit open dialogue. Well, it would, wouldn't it? If you're going to get crap from the CEO because you've actually called his decisions into doubt, he's not going to be very friendly with you. She's not going to be very friendly with you at the next time you have a meeting. And these breaches of confidentiality could certainly damage the trust between council members and the administration. And here I will simply mention, before I cease my contribution here, at least for the time being, that it's not unheard of that council members take different sides and follow parties and little cliques and niches, so that we're not getting a friendly working together, but we're getting partisan divisions. And that disunity is not helpful to democracy. And at that, I will seek leave to continue at another time.